the ANC is dead. The ANC is dead as a political organization or institution. If it gets 22% in 2029, I'll be very surprised. We're not fighting the ANC. We're fighting the chaos of a lack of leadership.
That's true, yeah.
That's all we're fighting.
Cyril's not the president. No.
People care too much, and I think the DA care far too much about the ANC. Fuck the ANC, who gives a shit? Like focus on what people voted for.
The more you show people what the truth is, how this is orchestrated, how this has come to be, how it's manipulated, and who benefits from it, and how when you buy that first house, or you buy that first piece of land to start your business, that in a moment, if you saved your whole life to buy that piece of land, and in one single moment someone can come and take it, and you are stuck, there's nothing you can do. That angers people, that upsets people, and it should. And people should be talking more about it.
I was chatting to someone from Kenya who said that, the ANC made one mistake, and I sort of interrupted immediately and said, no, they made many mistakes. He said, no, there's the one fundamental mistake. He says, when the Kenyans got their sort of freedom in 1960, they said, we must build together, we must create this new society. And in South Africa, we said, the government will do it for you.
Hello and welcome to Undercurrents. My name is Roman Kabalak. Today we're going to talk about land grabs and property rights in South Africa. It's something that we're all concerned about. There's lots of noise locally and internationally about expropriation, especially from so-called white farmers. But there's a more nefarious, precarious position that is happening in our country in that land grabs are not done under the auspices of the law. It's more of a mafia environment. So today we're going to talk to Joe Emilio, who created a documentary called Stolen Ground, which is linked below. I actually recommend that you watch that first before listening to this conversation. Joe will be joining us, and of course we'll be joined by Mark Oppenheimer, an esteemed legal advocate and scholar who understands everything about property rights and the law in this country. So thank you very much for watching. Please do subscribe before you watch. Enjoy. Well, Joe, I saw Stolen Ground when it first came out, and it really is, first of all, very excellent, so well done.
Thank you.
But most importantly, in this country, we're obsessed with sort of this idea of expropriation and going this style of Zimbabwe, and it's somehow going to be like an ordered thing like it was over there. But I think what you've shown and what a lot of people need to understand is land grabs, land invasion, erosion of property rights is often quite localized, quite brutal, and it's very chaotic rather than something that the state wants. So just give me a little bit of context about the idea for the documentary first, and what are the lessons that you really learned from it that maybe changed your mind about property rights in this country?
Yeah, I gotta admit, before I started on this journey, that I didn't realize how the state, specifically the ANC, has been actually fulfilling this plan of theirs for a very long time. This PI Act was written into law and signed in 1998 under the guise of goodwill. For example, if you rent out your house to someone and for whatever reason they just can't pay, you're not allowed to just evict them into the streets. You have to go through a court process, and I'm sure Mark will speak more to that. That was the idea, but it's been manipulated very badly. And the reason why I started with the Raceway is because, well, there was a guy on Twitter, or X, by the name of LP, and he put out a thread, a very long thread, of all the little dorpies and other little towns and cities that have the land, or these townships have just encroached more and more over the years. He showed satellite footage of before and after, and I did a very short video on it on Newsflash, and then I asked the audience, I said, do you guys want me to dig deeper into this? I'm curious. I want to know, why is it so easy for land grabs to happen like this, for townships to just grow overnight? It seems like the police are unable to control it, or the government's unable to control it. So what is really the cause? And I got a lot of feedback. Clay Wilson, a friend of mine, called me. He's like, we got to do it. And at the beginning, I wanted to do Grabau, which is one of the biggest land grabs. I wanted to do Hermanus because it was one of the most violent. And then the Raceway, and the reason why I wanted to do the Raceway was because a lot of the times, at least in the Western Cape, when people talk about land grabs, that one is used as an example. There's like a meme of the Raceway in its glory days, and then in 2021 how it was overtaken. So I thought that would be an interesting land grab to explore. And I quickly realized that I couldn't do all three at once. Too much information, too much, each one has its own story to tell, and also I didn't have any budget. So, you know, I couldn't get accommodation, and I would need security, and I would need a lot of things. So I decided, let's maybe focus just on Tigerburg Raceway, if there's a story there, if there's something to tell, and then in future, hopefully I can do more. And maybe not even Grabouw, other areas of South Africa, or Hermanus, or whatever. So I focused on the Tigerburg Raceway and quickly realized a few things. This was very sinister, and it was opportunistic and heavily orchestrated during COVID, during lockdown. And actually I reached out to Mark because I wanted to, in my personal opinion, Mark is one of the few people in South Africa that I can trust with a very fair analysis on legislation or what the Constitution says. So I first approached him to talk about the Constitution, and I told him what I was doing and stuff like that. And then he said, "Oh no, you need to look at the PI Act." Him and Martin actually said, "You need to," Martin van Staden from Free Market Foundation, "You need to look at the PI Act. That's the problem." I didn't know about it until he mentioned it and they mentioned it. And then when I looked into it and interviewed Mark and stuff, realized how this legislation is really a problem. And J.P. Smith also referenced the PI Act as well, and gave a lot of real life examples of how people have manipulated this act, and nefarious people have manipulated the act as well. So the PI Act is really the bad guy in this whole story.
No, it is. There was a great book written by Cole Kemp, who, Mark, I think you might know, Advocate. I think he's an advocate now, but it was called, you worked together. So he wrote a book called Promised Land that came out in just as COVID hit or somewhere around there, and it's about land grabs and land invasions since 1994 in South Africa. And he went all over the country to look at what the characteristics were for the most part. And Mark, maybe you're able to explain, this is not just poor people, desperate, who are coming across a piece of land and thinking that, okay, this is something that we can try and build a life on. They actually sold a dream by sort of political operators, and it's mostly what's called public land. Can you tell us about the mechanism of how these land grabs actually happen in real life?
Yeah, so I think there's good reason to think that it's orchestrated, that you could have a syndicate that's operating, that's identifying land. You often hear stories about a piece of land that could either be, as you say, publicly owned by the province or the city, or privately owned, like a piece of farmland, and that you will then very rapidly have a group of people arrive and meet the kind of minimum obligations that have come out through the case law to say this counts as a dwelling, and now you have to go through formal eviction proceedings. So people will arrive with belongings that, to create the impression there's someone who lives here. You could have suitcases or clothes or a mattress, but it's part of a sort of sham operation. I suppose it does seem that does rely on exploiting poor vulnerable people to play a role in this situation, and I think some of them probably do want some kind of better life. I imagine as well that you've got some people who are South Africans who've been let down by the state, and other people who have been driven out of their homelands because of terrible policies up north. So I imagine there's a lot of people from Zimbabwe or Mozambique who fled, and this sort of seems like a way to start your life. What's tragic about those situations often is that if you go and live on a piece of land like that, it's not developed. So I think they often become sites of disease. There's no proper sanitation. There's no water flow. Ideally, if you had a growing economy, you'd have people who are working and could eventually afford their own house. You also have this huge backlog when it comes to provision of housing by the state, and so you have this terrible crisis, and often it's borne by the private property owners. Who think about the tragedy of the racecourse. You had this vibrant community. You had people sort of engaged in the sports, engaged in commerce, and all of that just gets destroyed overnight in quite violent ways. I mean, the doc is really good at showing you the footage of how quickly it happens and how much value is lost, and then how it becomes almost irreversible now that you have this new community that I set up there.
I mean, one of the worst things about the Raceway in particular is like people just like weren't following COVID protocols. Like I didn't see many masks or like, you know, what was it called? Safe distancing? What is it called?
Social distancing.
Social distancing. Like none of that. It's just like straight in. But
you're forgetting, Ramon, that if you were engaged in a socially just thing, you couldn't get COVID.
That's true. Yeah. I did forget like Black Lives Matter riots in San Francisco. It didn't spread COVID at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to make light of the situation because you actually spoke to the owner of the race course. So it's a particular situation where the land was public. Mm-hmm. He was renting it from the city of Cape Town, I believe.
Yeah.
And the Raceway has been there for decades, if I remember correctly. He put in his own capital into it.
Yep.
And you had, you got white racers, colored spinners. You got, it was a real sort of societal, community-based raceway that trained up people to go racing professionally and whatever the case might be. But for someone like, I believe his name is Chris, the owner, I mean, he's basically been expropriated.
Yeah.
And the worst part is he has literally zero remedies for it. So can you explain a little bit about Chris himself, the owner, how much money he put in, and really, like, what has it done to him as a person? Because we need to humanize these sort of things. It's not just...
Yeah, Chris, interviewing him was quite tough because when you spoke to him about the emotional aspect of it, you'll see in the documentary he gets very emotional about it, and you could hear a pin drop in that room at that moment. And I don't doubt for a moment the amount of effort, blood, sweat and tears that he put into that raceway. And since making the documentary, a lot of comments have said how, I used to go to this raceway and it was a lot of fun and my heart goes out to Chris and all that stuff. So there's definitely a lot of support that he's gotten for that. And Chris is a man that really loves the motorsport industry. He put a lot of effort into that raceway, and he had done things that that unfortunately I wasn't able to include in the documentary due to time constraints. I really wanted to keep it to an hour, but there were things like he went to the States to learn how they do oval racing and then bring that Western kind of American vibe to South Africa. Then he also made effort to have like a national team and get to Springbok colors, he calls it, and had American racers come over and do racing. And he I do touch on that in the documentary, but he put a lot of effort to make it an international thing as well, to have racers from England or Australia or wherever. And that takes time. That takes relationship. You're working at relationships with international people, even government. You're putting the time and effort, not just in building a raceway that everybody supports and wants to go to, but also now international people want to come and race at this raceway because it's so good and so nice. The other aspect of it is he, you mentioned that he was renting it from Cape Town, and I find this very interesting argument online since the documentary came out. Some people say, yeah, but he was renting it. And then they kind of stop and it's like, okay, so that makes the land grab okay now? What are you trying to say? And even when you're renting something, you still have property rights. You may not own it, but there's still property rights that protect yourself. I can't go into your house and destroy everything and then kick you out. Even if you're renting it, I'm going to get arrested because you have property rights. And that's kind of the same situation here. And the renting aspect of it, he also, in the contract, I've seen it, he had the option to buy. And there was a point where he was discussing with the city about buying the property. I feel that the city of Cape Town, I would say specifically a specific department of the city of Cape Town, are very, almost like, we don't really want to take responsibility. And that's, I feel that it's a super injustice. That's what's happened to Chris. And going back to the community side, I want to also drive home to people that Chris wasn't just this rich guy that didn't care about the community, and people have no idea that even that little community raceway, he was hiring people from the area around, the Blokkenbos area and all that stuff. He was hiring, like if there was an event, he'd hire security guards or car guards or people to help out in the kitchen, or he was giving people jobs, jobs that don't exist now since that raceway is gone.
Correct.
And people who also talk about the renting and that the land was earmarked for housing. You know, Chris talks about that and how the land, when he assessed it, wasn't good for housing because of the water level. It's too high. He had to spend millions of rands to drain the water off the raceway. And when people come at me and say like, oh, but you don't care about the poor. What about the poor in there? And you know, like, oh, the people need a place to stay and stuff. What people don't realize is that when there's a land grab, even, let's say, for example, because the city says something else. When I approached the city about the housing issue, they said, no, we sent our assessors and they said it was great for housing. So
right.
Debatable on who's saying the truth. But regardless, it was true that that land was earmarked for housing. And then there was a land grab. And that seems to be a common theme in South Africa, that when land is earmarked for housing, there's a land grab. And what people don't realize is that when you do that, or when these nefarious, that Mark was talking about now, these nefarious people that do this, you're robbing even the poor that have waited for years on that waiting list for housing.
Well, they're supposed to get housing.
Yes.
But building a shack in a land grab is not the same as an RDP house.
Yeah,
an
and
RDP
you're talking
house
about,
is obviously much better.
But you're also talking about two different poor people.
Right.
It's like, so there you got the poor people, like for example, what are they called, the backyard dwellers,
yes.
right, who are waiting for housing, right, and then they get told, okay, this land is earmarked for housing, now you're gonna get your house, you know, and then a land grab happens, nothing to do with them, but a land grab happens, and then they're like, well, we were supposed to get housing. The city goes,
So it's not the same people at all. So the ones who are waiting for housing are not the ones doing the land grabs. For the most part.
At least in the story of the Tigerburg Raceway, that's the case. I cannot be 100% sure about other land grabs,
okay.
But in the Tigerburg Raceway, that seems to be the case. That there was some people that were waiting for housing, land grab happens, and they fall short of that. And then there's probably other examples as well, and there probably are. They're probably one and the same in some other areas. I think every land grab situation, or almost every land grab situation, has a lot of similarities, but there are different stories.
But the pattern is earmarked for housing. Mm-hmm. This is public information, I assume.
Yes.
And based on that public information, the chances of a land grab happening in that particular area are higher than in other areas. Is that fair?
Yes, because I did ask JP Smith about that. I said, is that a common theme? Is that, and he said, well, when a land is earmarked for housing, it is public knowledge. You can go check it out on the City of Cape Town. They're very transparent about that. But what they saw was that some of the councillors and ward people, they have better access to it than the public does. Obviously, there's some information of the public that's redacted and people can't see. But councillors were basically printing out maps and. Obviously, why would you print out the map if you have nothing to do with the land grab? But then, JP speaks more about that and how some of these councillors were basically using the information to plan a land grab. Because what they would do is they'd either chat to, I assume, a gangster or mafioso or shack farmers or whatever, and say, hey, we just got notice that this land is earmarked for housing. Here's the map. Plan out your thing, whether it's, or it could be that a shack farmer has found someone that works within the city who's corrupt and says, hey, where's your next earmarked land? Here's 5,000 Rand, tell me, And
then the economics is, Mark, I'll come back to you in a moment, I promise, but the economics is, you tell us where the thing is, we'll pay you a bribe to know where it is, probably, and then we go there and we basically stake out and sell those plots.
Yes.
To people who build shacks on them.
Yeah.
That's the business model.
Yes, and I would imagine that even the guy who gave that information, now this is all speculation on my part, but I would imagine that the guy who got the bribe to tell the shack farmer about this land probably also gets a cut from all the renting that happens, because these shacks are rented for 5,000 to 15,000 rand per plot. So yeah, it's a very lucrative thing. What's very interesting, and I haven't mentioned this on any other discussion about this, is that there was a budget for the Tigerburg Raceway. So in other words, the city had planned a budget to do the RDP housing or housing project, and that seems to have disappeared.
Oh, interesting.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. So, Mark, as the only one without a fake LB, I got a fake LB. Sunday Times said so, but as someone like you who's respected.
Well, you went to Wits, so obviously it's a fake LB.
Ouch. Where did you go? Oh, UCT.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say that out loud right now.
Can't really brag about UCT anymore.
Yeah, very true. But as someone who's in the legal field, I think it's important for people to realize, and you can elucidate this point. We hear that the DA is like for property rights, and let's assume that they are for the most part. A land grab happens, and then somehow they're just unable to do something about it. Joe says it's the Pie Act. You say it's the Pie Act. So let's talk about this Pie Act. Unfortunately, it doesn't like grow the pie or minimize the pie. Like basically, what exactly is it, and what are the repercussions of it that we're feeling every day, especially in and around land grabs?
The purpose of the Act really is to prevent people from engaging in unlawful evictions. So what you had before the Act was there was no need to have a court process. You could evict someone, and the idea was to create some protections. The thought was that it would be for these sorts of situations, so for land grab cases. The case law extended it. So often what you have is that it's used for tenants who move into a property, maybe pay for the first month and then stop paying. And so it's had a big dampening effect on people willing to invest in property, because there's a risk that, you know, if you go and buy an apartment for a commercial purpose, which is to rent it out, that if someone stops paying, you will be able to evict them, but in a very long, expensive procedure. It can take many years. One of the examples I often think about, I was in court and saw a colleague who was acting for a woman who'd been staying in the apartment for 4 years and, you know, hadn't paid for 4 years during that time, and an eviction proceeding had been brought. And often there's a sense in which there are two kinds of people who can get lawyers. Those who are very wealthy and those who are very poor. If you're in the middle, there's no like law clinic that's going to protect you, and if you know, lawyers can be expensive. So she was being represented by the Center for Applied Legal Studies at Wits, and the lawyer sort of said to the other side, he's like, look, I think we should try and settle this matter, because, you know, if you win, my client will probably take it on appeal, and this will drag out for a long time. And so the settlement that was offered was pay her 50,000 rand and she'll leave. So that sort of starts to look like an extortion racket, right? And if you think it's going to take me 4 years to be able to, you know, take back what is mine, and spend enormous amount of money hiring lawyers, getting the sheriff to perform the eviction, it just looks like a terrible business decision to go and invest in property. And so the knock-on effects are pretty dangerous, and I think we see it specifically in Johannesburg. You know, the inner city, if you look at the scale of the inner city of Joburg, I mean, it is gigantic. You know, it really dwarfs Sandton, and was a big commercial hub. And various people have put in money to try and refurbish. There have been improvement districts, and a lot of them have collapsed, partly because of NGOs that you know, prevent evictions. So someone might buy a building, it'll be a terrible building in many ways, because you've got the piping that was ripped out by, you know, illegal squatters. You know, the electricity's gone, and so they want to refurbish it and turn it into something else, and then they can't perform the eviction, so it becomes a loss. So you mentioned the DA being hamstrung. Part of the difficulty is that, you know, it's national legislation. So, you know, even if the DA control the province in the Western Cape, they are bound by the rules in that act. And so if you wanted to have a different set of rules, you can't. The city, I think, has tried to engage in litigation efforts. One of the difficulties that I think they had was, what happens if you've got a piece of land that gets seized? How long can you take to perform the eviction? And so there's a rule that you can see something back in the act. So let's say I'm walking down the road and someone grabs my wallet. I can go after them, grab my wallet back, and that's okay. That's sort of seen as a counter.
Spoliation.
Yeah.
Counter-spoliation.
Counter-spoliation.
Okay, I'll be guys, get one.
Yeah. So the counter-spoliation is fine. But if I 3 months later track the guy down and go to his apartment and say, that's my wallet, and I grab it, that's an act of spoliation. And our rule is that the person who is spoliated, in other words, the person who stole my wallet, can go to court and say, I was in peaceful possession of this property, and this person took it from me without having a court order to do so. They resorted to self-help, and so I want the wallet back, and the court will mandate the wallet must go back. They don't entertain the question about who the real owner is.
And this is, if I may say, this I believe is common law.
Yes.
Well, this was something that the Romans had 2,000 years ago, because in the context, if something belongs to you and you abandoned it, you have no right to it after the fact, right? If I come and steal your cows and you don't care for months until one day you do care and you try to take it back, they try to ameliorate that sort of relationship about people actually, you care or you don't care about property rights, but it needs to be fairly immediate that you have to care about it rather than when you feel like it. So it makes sense in like that sort of context.
Yeah, there's a sort of separate thing about res derelicta, which is when you've abandoned something, and that requires an intent to abandon. Interestingly enough, if we look at the current Expropriation Act, one of the grounds in which the state can expropriate your property and pay you no compensation is if it's abandoned, but they don't use that ordinary definition of an intention to abandon. They say we can judge it based on your conduct and your failure to exercise control over it. And one of the reasons why you might be able to fail to exercise control over it is that a group of people invaded your land. And so you're unable to exercise control over it. Because
well, you prevented from it, thanks through the PI Act.
Yeah.
Interesting thing about the PI Act, as far as I'm aware and understand, it was created specifically like maybe to defend the rights of people living on farms or people who've been living on farms for a long time, poor people who have taken something or so to prevent them from just, because it's all tied to dignity at the end of the day under the constitutional dispensation. But a lot of the sort of the growing context of the PI Act to include like rental tenants in Santon and things like that has mostly been done through case law, if I remember my classes correctly. So you have a lot of NGOs and the benches of our courts that have greatly expanded the definition of this act to where it is now, where it's practically like almost a bit stupid in a way.
Yes, so as you say, you have activist groups who've wanted to extend the meaning of it and various decisions that have come out. One of the things that it does that's very difficult on, let's say, those trying to step their way out of poverty, you might have someone who has a small dwelling and they want to rent out a room to someone. And that person then stops paying the rent and now they can't evict them. And so the thing that was generating an income for the family no longer does. And now it's very onerous to go to court because it's expensive and lengthy. I think there's also, in abstract, it seems reasonable to say before you perform out the eviction, we want you to go through a court process so we can check that you really are the owner, that this person is there unlawfully. And so it feels like, okay, it's a serious thing, you're kicking someone out of their house, we should have some supervision over it. The difficulty is that in practice, our court system is so overburdened by all sorts of other litigation, often other things that are state failures. So in Johannesburg, most litigation involves the road accident fund. So we had a situation recently where in order to get a trial date, once your case was ready, in other words, everyone had filed papers, you discovered documents, that in itself could take a number of years to get to that point. They were then allocating dates in 2031. So, that's 6 years from now. So think about having to resolve a dispute under those circumstances. It's just so onerous. And so because we don't have an efficient judiciary, it makes the eviction process, untenable. And we've created a whole bunch of extra rules as well, things that make it quite difficult to, you've got to make sure the notice of the eviction comes to someone, you have to have a two-step process. It's very difficult when you have a large number of people that are occupying a place to ensure that everybody knows about it. So judges will often, who are sympathetic to the illegal occupier, will say, well, let's create a bit more time, do this extra service. So that just ramps up the costs. And as I said, just disincentivizes people. One way you could resolve the problem was if you had a specialist eviction court. So, and the idea was all of these things will be done on a very urgent basis. All matters will be dealt with within a month, let's say. That doesn't sound urgent to anyone who runs a business, but for lawyers it would be very quick. And what it would do as well is that it would disincentivize people from engaging in unlawful occupations, because they know, well, if I do this, I'm going to be kicked out in a month. And it's not nice being kicked out of a property. Whereas in the current situation, you can say, well, I can do it and maybe you'll get me out in 5 years, but that's 5 years of being able to live rent free.
5 years unfettered, not ownership, but 5 years unfettered rent free living is a good deal. Yeah. I see why people would take it on. But unfortunately, it's due to the fact that we are so stuck in terms of evictions. People do resort to all sorts of other things to evict people, which are not legal, lawful, or let alone kind or nice. People take desperate measures, and it's quite sad to see where we are at the moment. But for someone like Chris, it's more difficult because he rented the property from the city, and all of the improvements that he made, I think at a cost of 60 million rand or something over the years, has basically been expropriated. What remedies does he actually have?
He doesn't.
Nothing.
When I approached the city and I asked them, I said, do you have any plans to fix it? And they were like, oh, we looked at different options, but we haven't decided on anything. It's been 5 years. If you haven't decided on anything, you're not going to decide on anything. And through my investigation and looking at the story, I feel like I know that JP or Chris doesn't or feels a lot of anger towards JP, and I completely understand it. But I think that JP is also limited in the kind of authority that he can do and tell the city what to do. He's focused on security. He can't tell or force the city to, hey, evict these guys, or let's find another race or land for Raceway or whatever. I'm quite disappointed with the city, no matter who's in control of that department, that I don't know if they saw the documentary or not, but if they did, they should have at least reached out to Chris and say, hey, sorry, we messed up. Let's look at land now. Let's get, because Chris is more than willing to do it. I asked him, I said, if someone came to you now with 60 million, 80 million rand to build a new one, would you do it? And he said, in a heartbeat. So he does want to, that's how much he loves the sport. And if the city had come now, even after the documentary, and said, hey, let's talk now. Let's find a new piece of land. Let's see what we can do. Maybe we can have some events to raise some funds to help start it up. Find big companies who also watch the documentary and be like, oh crap, okay, let's sponsor some money here so that you can do this race that will hopefully generate even more money for you to build another raceway. But no such action has been taken, and I think the city's missing out on a great PR move there. Imagine how, okay, the city admits that they made a mistake. We know that it was the PI Act mainly, but now we're trying to fix the problem. But unfortunately, for the raceway, the current Tigerburg Raceway that exists right now, that land is completely, even if they removed the people there, I don't think that land is you'd have to spend millions again to refurbish it. You're better off just renting a new piece of land, and probably be cheaper in the long run. Because they destroyed everything. They leveled all the halls. He had like VIP lounges. They leveled it all to the ground. All the balustrades, everything was leveled to the ground in 7 days.
In 7 days?
In 7 days. Gone.
It's like the Lord of War. Have you seen Lord of War, the movie? Where their plane disappears in 24 hours, and crash lands it in the middle of Congo or something.
100. It was like that. It was exactly like
just
that.
Just like a complete.
Even in the documentary, you can see with some aerial footage, they're hammering away at the roof to like basically take it down.
But for what? Are they using that as building material for their things? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you'll see there's another image of them. They put bricks to outline where a shack would go, and poles as well. There's imagery of all these people walking around, kind of looking almost like, okay, they put a shovel down and they're like, this is my little plot of land that I'm going to take. So yeah.
So who are the people responsible, like, especially in Tigerburg, but in general, when I read that book by your friend Carl Kemp, Promised Land, it really did feel like local politicians, local hoodlums, as we said before, like people know that this is going to be a housing project, we can go in there, stake it out, sell plots for 5 to 15,000 rand, and then maybe like generate rental income from those things illegally completely. So in terms of Tigerburg, are these official political party councillors, or are they like local gangsters? Do we know exactly?
It's very difficult to find out who, like a specific name, but what we do know is that there's various stories, and they're difficult to verify. So for example, the one lady I spoke to with the alias Daisy, who does a lot of work in these townships and stuff like that to help people get toilets or whatever. So she knows, she's been on the ground, she speaks to people on the ground, she's been in the Tigerburg Raceway. And she said that when they spoke to the people there, they said that it was a ward councillor that told them to invade the land. But then I saw an article that said the same thing, that verified what she was saying. And when they spoke to the ward councillor, obviously they're going to say, no, I didn't say that. So again, hard to verify. But I wouldn't be surprised that that's how it kind of started. I would even go far back as to say it's the ANC. I think the ANC is the main people behind these land grabs, because they're the ones that created the PI Act. They're the ones that signed it into law, and they're the ones that since 1998 haven't done any effort to fix it. They just let it happen.
Well, I mean, I haven't fixed anything since then. I mean, it's difficult to say like intention versus like just rank incompetence. You know?
There probably is a bit of incompetence, but I do think that on some level, some ANC politicians are involved, or in some way, maybe not with the Tigerburg Raceway story, but in other parts of South Africa. There's syndications and syndicates that operate with whatever ministers, not even ministers, just people that work within the ANC at even a lower level, that communicate with one another and orchestrate these kinds of things and make massive amounts of money. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And that's why they keep it in, because they're like, even if it was through incompetence that it first came in, they're like, well, we're benefiting from it now, so why would we stop it? You know?
And Mark, in your legal work, working on these sort of cases, like the sort of land grab cases, like, do you see a pattern developing of it becoming more organized, or is it still a little bit sort of chaotic and opaque?
I get the sense that there probably is some organization behind these things. And it makes sense that you would have informal networks, you know, where people, you know, be able to identify land and seize opportunities. I think some things are chaotic, you know, and opportunistic, and people sort of seize opportunities as they arise. There are a couple of things worth noting. So the one is that, as Joe talks about those who are profiting from it, the PI Act actually makes that criminal. So if you seize a building or a piece of land, put people in there and then charge for it, that's a criminal act. And so, interesting enough, I see in the Daki Loyolo talks about wanting to add in further measures to deter people from engaging in their conduct. But what you might want to do is implement the measures that are currently there. I'm unaware of anyone who's been prosecuted for engaging in this conduct. And so maybe there's a reluctance for people to lay charges or for the NPA to prosecute, but that does seem like a useful lever. You know, I often think in economic terms, you want to be able to create the right system so that people are incentivized to do things that are beneficial. Often what people will do is serve their own interests. And so, as you say, if you're a squatter who realizes, well, I can do this for 5 years with, you know, a long court process that'll be backed by an NGO, I might as well. But you know, if you're the kind of slumlord who's operating behind the scenes, you think, but I don't really want to spend 3 years in jail. You know, it's going to disincentivize the conduct. So that's one lever worth thinking about. The other one is, you know, there'll be a debate about how involved the ANC are, but with the EFF, I mean, they're very overt in saying the land is yours, you must take it. Julius was prosecuted briefly in 2016 for calling people to engage in land grabs. That charge disappeared. So he gave this speech outside Newcastle, and there was a hate speech investigation which I was involved in, involving the Human Rights Commission. But yeah, it's sort of interesting that you basically breach the Rights Assemblies Act, an ordinary reading of it, when you're calling on people to perform illegal activity like land grabs. That breaches the legislation. And as I say, that prosecution disappeared. But they've been very consistent on that front. And part of it is to play around with this notion of who is an owner. So to make a kind of claim that, no white person can be a true owner, they're all land thieves, they came here in 1652, and we are the real inheritors of the land, so the land is already ours, it's just a matter of taking what is yours. That sort of play with any ordinary notion of what property rights is very dangerous.
Well, especially when he lives in the house of a white man.
Sure.
It's a little bit odd. And when is he taking over his own house?
Well, he's leading the way. He sort of already sees the means of production from the white Mazati.
Maybe he's not paying him. So maybe that's the goal. But there really is no. The real point of this conversation with both of you is that a lot of people think like land invasions, land claims, erosion of property rights is like this sort of methodical thing that happens over time, but it's not. At the end of the day, right? I think even in Zimbabwe, Mugabe needed some political victory to remain in power. And he says, well, the easiest thing to do is to call the veterans who are 22 years old of a 40-year-old war, say, okay, you're the war veterans, the land is yours, go for it. But they were mostly militias, like literally militias. Protected by the police didn't arrive, or the military did nothing, it's fine. But it's in the same scenario as this, where you got low-level thugs and political operators taking over people's land, and mostly public land that used to be almost exclusively public land for a long time, because that was the easiest thing, because they knew the public or the municipality or the province can't defend themselves against these land invasions. But are they encroaching more and more into private land? Because even Tigerburg is a public land by definition. But once it starts encroaching into private land, the violence and the anxiety and the tensions ramping up from that is going to be like apocalyptic in comparison.
Well, I do want to do more of these land grab stories. I did say that Tigerburg Raceway is a specific story. It's mainly about a business that was destroyed and a community and an industry that was hampered because of this land grab. But there are private land grabs that have happened in the Western Cape, and I do plan on investigating those because I think there's a different story to tell there. I would agree that the majority is public land, but I would actually disagree that with you about you compare to Zimbabwe and how things happen there. And in my documentary, I say that the ANC is not doing the same thing. The ANC's they're not doing it with bulldozers, doing it with silence. And a good analogy I can give is, well, Zimbabwe knocked down the front door, basically, and said, we're going to take it. What the ANC seems to be doing, at least in my view, is that they're going through the back door. They're sneakily going through the back door, and you don't even realize it. And what people also need to be aware of is that when you put the PI Act together with the Expropriation Act, together with other legislation that is coming into law, like the deeds, where basically deeds office now needs to know what race you are when you own land. And there's another bill being developed that allows the government to redistribute land according to demographics of South Africa. When you start adding all these up, it's a very interesting picture.
And the land court, and the land courts bill.
Yep.
Right. So all land claim things, or arguments are going to go through the land court itself. They're setting up a land court specifically. They're going to fill it up with cadres, and then whatever the judge says, the land court is going to be the defining precedence for whatever they want at the end of the day. Like, that's the most pernicious thing.
And that's why I say, I think on some level, don't know who, the ANC has been planning this for a very long time, and they're doing it stealthily, and I think they learned that from Zimbabwe, that knocking down the front door isn't the best way to go about it, but we can do it another way. And that's one thing the ANC is very good at, is time.
I think it's called boiling the frog.
Boiling the frog, yeah, exactly. And I think we are seeing that with property rights. And it's happening now with Joburg, the buildings in Joburg. They're using that as an excuse. Oh, we're going to expropriate without compensation because we want to bring Joburg back to its former glory.
I think the Minister of Public Works agrees with that, though.
Yeah,
He's
which
a
is
DA
very
person,
surprising. Yeah, I would love to interview him on my documentary.
Maybe you don't. He's all right. But I think, Mark, you and I are based in Joburg. I mean, this is a KP over here. We invited him for the day to meet, like, a real African city like ours. But I do think, I went to WITS in 2007, and it took me like 7 years to do a 4-year degree, so I left a while after that. But since I've known Joburg, since 2007, I can't think of a single major building, new infrastructure, or anything happening other than the bus lanes. But other than that, there's been nothing built in Joburg or cleaned up to any degree in the past 15, 20 years. Arguably because of PI. Would you say I'm correct? And there's lots of other factors, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, no, I think there were efforts. So if you think about Maboneng being a good example, where you had a small number of investors who thought, let's make this little island in a sea of chaos. And for a while it worked quite well. I mean, Maboneng had this great art districts, wonderful restaurants, William Kentridge still has a place there. And it was, people very enthusiastically embraced the space. I had friends who bought apartments there. And I think for a number of reasons it failed. Some of it is, PI Act makes it very hard to evict illegal tenants in the area. You also have crumbling infrastructure problems. You have other kinds of state failures that gets in the way. So, I mean, the inner city, I think, has huge problems with the water access. People won't have water for like 2 weeks. So that's a sanitation crisis. Makes it very hard to operate a proper business under those conditions. You also had this terrible billing crisis. So you have a situation where the city hadn't checked people's meters for like 20 years. And then, once someone comes in and develops, they'd say, well, this person we can make pay. And so they would give them a 20-year back bill for things that were, accumulated by others. And so for a while, I did a lot of litigation around that. And all of those cuts basically just, bled out the inner city. You sort of see like parts of Braamfontein that got quite nice for a while and, now aren't. So the edge of civilization in the city is sort of like, decreasing, which is a pity because, it is, as you said, Joburg is one of those world-class cities.
It can be, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we have friends in the middle of Joburg who own like a penthouse apartments, right? I mean, I'm not going to say their names, but we know who they are.
Sure.
It's brilliant, right? They got an outdoor shower right at the top in the sky line of Joburg. Great apartment. I mean, you can just imagine the possibilities for housing, for investment, for infrastructure, even the industrial sector of Joburg, like the Joburg South. Nothing has been built. I can't think of anything that has been built meaningfully for the past 30 years. I know Sandton has improved dramatically, but nothing on this side. How are you supposed to build a country if you can't build a building?
Sure, and even if you look at Sandton, so you had, cranes up for years everywhere, building, big skyscrapers, and that's shifted. A lot of buildings in Sandton are unoccupied. I think the economic climate as well makes it difficult when you've got constant threats to property rights. The expropriation or compensation debates has been raging for a very long time. Having that sort of Damocles hanging over your head, as much as businesses might feel they don't want to speak out against it because they don't want to be targeted by the state, they will vote with their feet. And so people will say, well, we could go and invest in this building, but we don't want the state taking it away from us, or all the other myriad of ways in which we make it so difficult for people to build a life for themselves is going to dampen economic growth. If you dampen economic growth, you're going to have high levels of unemployment, more poverty, and you have a death spiral problem. I think there is also a sense in which we think about those NGOs who've played a big role in undermining property rights. I think in each individual case, what you had was people who were very kind-hearted, who wanted to help someone, and they had good intentions, and they thought, here's someone who's poor and vulnerable and disabled and ill and whatever else, they're living in this place, and if I can just keep them there for another couple of years, that'll be good for them. Now, I think some guys, let's say, so I'm taking a very charitable interpretation.
Much more charitable than I am. These are communists who need to be shot. Anyway, but we can edit that out.
For the effect of all that sort of good intentions is that you wind up making it very difficult to reform the landscape. So you entrench poverty, you don't allow for development and growth, you keep people in this state of vulnerability. The other problem with these endless sort of housing lists, a good friend of mine's from Malawi, and she said, in Malawi, no one expects anything from the state. You just know it's not going to happen.
And that's Mark, that's such an important point. I've traveled SADC many times. I was in Maputo like 2 years ago. And you speak to people, like they expect nothing from anyone, anywhere, anytime.
And the difference is, so, she comes to South Africa and sees it as a land of opportunity. She says, if you work hard, you'll do well, which she has. She's done incredible things with small amounts of resources. She's produced 4 music albums. She's produced a DVD of music videos, like very entrepreneurial. And she says, South Africans have this sense of, but the state will eventually do it for me, so why should I work hard?
And that's not wrong.
Yeah,
that is a correct expectation to have, because that's exactly what the constitutional dispensation and the political messaging has been for 30 years.
Yes.
So it's not wrong for South Africans to believe that. There is an entitlement issue, but it's an entitlement that is based on reality.
Yeah, and I think I was chatting to someone from Kenya who said that the ANC made one mistake, and I sort of interrupted immediately and said, no, they made many mistakes. He said, no, there's the one fundamental mistake. He says, when the Kenyans got their sort of freedom in 1960, they said, we must build together. We must create this new society. And in South Africa, we said, the government will do it for you. And he says, that's so dangerous. And it's interesting, if you look at organizations like Solidarity, there's this real sense of, don't expect anything from the government. You need a community structure that will build it. That self-doing sort of attitude. And they're like, we're going to build our own universities, we're going to build our own schools, we're going to build our own communities. And I think it's a hard thing to sort of acknowledge, but if you take responsibility for your destiny as a community or as an individual, you're much more likely to prosper than expecting a withered state to help you, especially when it's shown that it's often incapable of doing that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said the case that one of the great failures we've had as a country post apartheid, you can call it what I want, but it had a goal I don't agree with, obviously, but it had a goal, it had a way to effect that goal, and it had a strategy in place. So they understood that we need to build like local industries, to build up the army, to build up local manufacturing. So you have to get like cheap energy. So Eskom's very important for that, and ISCO is important for the steel and metal, and Denel's important. If sanctions come, we can produce our own weaponry. So all these like sort of state-owned institutions and entities were created with a specific goal that we can sort of become a resilient state, work with other states, but importantly, like we need to build our own capacity up before we can ever enter into like the global trade as such. But I found that since 1994 in particular, especially at the dawn of democracy, and is inherent in democracy, to have a cohesive strategy is almost impossible. Because the ebbs and flows of what people want is based on election results and who's in charge, and it's almost like we need to reset the country to have another form of dictatorship, benevolent one, hopefully. They can have like a 40-year plan.
It's an interesting view. I think that...
Interesting view, yeah, bullshit.
Well, let me put it this way. So, the idea of the central planner seems appealing, okay? Because I think in some industries, we imagine the brilliant architect who has this vision and is able to build up something wonderful and very lucrative.
Singapore.
Yeah, think about Singapore,
yes.
Okay, and you think about, let's say, someone like Elon Musk being able to have a vision for Starlink or Tesla, these great entrepreneurs. Now, I think where the difference lies, often Singapore is used as a case for this is something we should model ourselves on. Here's a couple of reasons why I think that's difficult to do. One is Singapore is tiny. It's a city-state, really. It's easy to be able to sort of run a central command economy under those circumstances. And they do have a lot of free market capitalism as well. And you're also beautifully positioned for trade in that region of the world. Whereas in South Africa, it's a much bigger society. I think it's much more difficult to sort of issue commands. I suppose what's hard to understand about laissez-faire capitalism is that you don't have a plan in the same way. What you have is an environment. So I'll give you a good case for it. So let's say I show you a beautiful crystal necklace and I say to you, make one of these with a plan. Like, okay, that's going to be a very hard thing to do, and how do we get the crystals to match just right? Someone else says, I'm not going to have a plan. What I'm going to do is create an environment where the crystals can grow. So I'm going to put some sugar and some water, I'm going to put the string in, and the crystals prosper. Okay? But we don't know exactly what those particular crystals will look like, but we know we'll be able to replicate it well. And I think that's what capitalism is. You create an environment where you don't have too many things getting in the way. You don't know exactly what the end product will be, but in a fertile environment, you will have innovation. You'll have people starting businesses. They'll surprise you. They'll be innovative. They'll be reactive to the market. You know, one of the big failures of command economies in the Soviet Union was there'd be an assumption by some bureaucrat about, okay, we're going to need X number of shoes and this many pants and this sort of sizes, and you'd wind up with serious shortages and oversupply because they, were bad at working out like, oh, it turns out people don't like the color of these shoes, they don't want to wear them.
Mark, we lived through COVID lockdowns. We know exactly what we were and not allowed to buy. Like we sort of an idea. Roast chicken off the table.
Yeah, think about, that's a great example of a command economy, right?
So I'm not in favor of a command economy. I'm in favor of monopoly on violence through strong leadership. Bit of a difference.
That's interesting. You could take, the state promises that idea of monopoly on violence, right? So the idea of, we're going to run the police force, and you could have a minimalist state that has that view. You might think that in some sense in South Africa we've abandoned that view. I would imagine that if you're walking down the street and you see a police officer versus someone in a private security company, you're probably more comfortable with the private security officer. You don't think they're going to shake you down, and that we have created our own private monopolies on violence here because the state's not very good at doing that.
Correct.
And it works pretty well.
And that's the thing, it does work pretty well. So Joe, if I may give you, I'm not going to ask you what to follow my lead, but what would be interesting to find out, because I think the documentary, and it is linked below, people should watch it of course, but it would be very good to see how they happen is important, but more importantly, what can a private sector solution look like to it? And unfortunately, through the PI Act, I don't think there is a solution that is actually lawful in a real sense of the term. Unless you go in immediately before they even set up the structure. Like it has to be such a fast response.
Yes.
That is the only solution I can think of.
And that's what JP speaks to as well. Like when we were chatting about it, he said like, because of the way the PI Act is written, you have to be there immediately to stop it. And he can't put a police officer on every corner of every street of Cape Town or the Western Cape for that matter. They just don't have the resources. And that maybe, I don't know if private security can get involved. They would be far more responsive than the SAPs but then again you have another issue of like not everybody can afford private security. And I think in terms of a solution to the PI Act, I really think the only way is amending it or somehow creating enough public pressure that the people that are in power are forced to change it, because right now we're in the GNU, and while I have my reservations about the GNU,
me too.
If public pressure, media, guys such as yourself keep talking about it, and men like Mark keep making noise about it, eventually they will be forced to look at it and change it and that stuff. But it's going to take time and effort, and in that time, like now with the amendments to the PI Acts, the DA went to the Portfolio Committee. The Portfolio Committee actually agreed with the DA and said, yeah, we need to amend the PI Act. We're right. But we're going to come back in March 2026 with our own amendments as well. So there's going to be a lengthy process. And in that time, a year from now, basically, how many more land grabs are going to happen?
Yeah.
And
do you think the incentive is that? The incentive structure is that we know for a fact the PI Act prevents us land grabbers from actually being persecuted in any way. Like, is that really the incentive? Or Mark can answer if you want to. But I assume you know that if I was a shack farmer, or whatever you call it, like I would say, the incentive, only incentive to this is A, I make money, but B, I can't actually be punished in a real sense.
Yeah, so it's interesting that there is the mechanism for punishment in the Act. So it does feel like one way of thinking about these problems is that you've got a variety of systems that are sitting next to each other. And if you have corrosion in a few of them, it makes them all collapse quite badly. so if you had, for example, specialist courts that were set up for evictions, and you also fast-track things like criminal prosecutions of guys running these rackets. One of the things we did during 2010 was set up these specialist courts for criminals during the World Cup, right? So they were like, we're going to be able to prosecute people within 2 weeks. And that worked quite well for maintaining law and order, right? The idea was we have a big financial incentive. We don't want people going back to their home countries saying I got robbed in South Africa.
But that's when Sepp Blatter was our president for a month. Best president we ever had.
Yeah.
Remember the head of FIFA? Like he was the president, let's be honest. The country ran like a dream. It can be done.
Yeah.
But I fully agree with you. Yeah.
So I suppose it's worth thinking about one of the difficulties that you have is how many of those structures are controlled at a national level and how many are provincial and how many are local. So, one of the difficulties you have in Cape Town is people say, the DA doesn't care about Khayelitsha because they don't police those areas. You go, yeah, because they're national police. It's not city police. So decentralization seems like an important thing for the DA to care about. So, to demonstrate that we're actually good at governing, they need to sort of gain more power for themselves, and I think should be, lobbying quite hard on that front. Or taking a view of interpreting legislation in a reasonable way. We say, well, we think this allows us to do this. If you don't like it, come at us. But you might need a similar thing with courts. So, could you set up a court manned by people from that province? I mean, one of the difficulties the DA have is that, the judges in the Western Cape are picked through the Judicial Service Commission, which is the national body, and so you might very well deliberately pick people who are going to be hostile to their interests.
Well, it has been the case. I remember John Swalpe was the judge president, at the time. And I remember when they had that case of a land grab, that man faked being in the bath, and they dragged him out sort of naked. And he literally ran into a shack, got undressed, and by the time they caught up to him, and he was naked, and that made the news, right? Then they say, no, there's a moratorium on all evictions until the state of disaster is lifted. The state of disaster lasted 2.5 years, 3 years. I mean, who knows how many land grabs happened at the time.
I'm going to release a clip soon about the stats of that, and it's shocking.
Oh, really?
You're talking over 200,000 cases that the city managed to remove.
To remove?
So you're talking about poles in the ground, markings, shacks, dwellings of all sorts. Over 200,000 were removed. So the total number is much higher, and the majority of that happened in the first few months of COVID. That's how you know it's highly orchestrated.
Yes, exactly. But here's the thing. Like if I was a DA strategist, I tried to be, but they wouldn't allow me to be. If I was a DA strategist and I said, listen, the law is against us, it's very slow, Parliament is slow, the courts are very slow, why don't we just be like Carl Schmidt and be the sovereign and decide the exception? Like we actually use the chaos to just impose order, maybe in an unlawful fashion, but if it only goes to court in 10 years, who gives a shit?
Well, I've been saying for a long time that I think the DA needs to grow a bit of a backbone, especially in the Western Cape. I think that they do have some amount of authority in the Western Cape because they run the majority. I know that Jordan, with the story of the load shedding, was able to change things. That's why Cape Town has lighter load shedding than the rest of South Africa. And yes, there was a big fight, and Cyril threw his toys out of the cart and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they did it. And I think that DA needs to be a bit more brazen, a bit more,
Joe, I fully agree with you. But here's the thing: we know for a fact, Jordan Hill-Lewis, who's the mayor of Cape Town, fought the taxi industry and won.
Yeah.
It's the only thing on record that I can think of where the taxi industry actually backed off. Mm-hmm. So my postulation, and I was actually saw when I was in government, these people don't actually know how much power they actually have.
Interesting.
Because the bureaucracy actually tells them they don't have that power. But in reality they do.
Yes.
But the bureaucracy needs to work with them, and so they like sort of neuter what they actually want to achieve just to get a better working relationship to focus on the long-term projects, which is important. I fully agree, which is important. But I really think someone like J.P. Smith and someone like Jordan Hill-Lewis, if they really wanted to be the exception, like the sovereign that proves the exception, I think they can really do it.
They can. I think the one flaw with the DA whether it's national or in the Western Cape, is that they care too much about what the media says.
Really?
And, yeah.
I wouldn't have thought.
And that's their downfall. That really is their downfall.
Completely.
Because they could easily make a solution with these land grabs, whether it be using private NGOs to get involved and help. I was at AfriForum this morning and had a conversation about the Raceway, and they think that there might be litigation that could happen to rectify what has happened.
So you just rope in all your funders at the Stellenbosch Mafia. You say, listen, but literally, we need a 100 million rand fund for a fast response team that prevents land grabs. They did it for the traffic. They got drone warfare, and they got like fast cars, and they got like souped up drone thermal cameras for speeding and shit like that. So they have done it. Just have that for land grabs and property rights.
They should.
It can be done.
It can be done.
And the Stellenbosch guys will give it to them immediately.
Yeah, I think Sakaliga would also get involved with that. I know Sakaliga are also investigating land grabs and what they can do and how they can help, because they saw with the Tigerburg Raceway how it can affect businesses. Whether the land was rented from the city or not doesn't make a difference. There was a business, there was an economic hub in that area that is now gone. So it's definitely on Sakaliga's radar to do something about it. And I think maybe that is the solution, is other people having that attitude, NGOs and private people having that attitude of, well, then we're going to protect it ourselves.
Correct.
And it's going to be very difficult for the ANC to be like, well, you're not allowed to protect yourself. Then you're going to be standing in court against the ANC, and the ANC is going to have to explain why it's okay or not okay for you to protect your property when it's in the Constitution.
Correct.
Section 25 of the Constitution. And in the Constitution it says that you're allowed to protect yourself, you're allowed to protect your property. Mark can obviously speak more on that, but it's going to be very difficult for the ANC. Once people start doing it themselves, it's very difficult for the ANC to have a case for, no, you're not allowed to.
I just think people are scared about the paper tiger. The ANC is dead. Like the ANC is dead as a political organization or institution. If it gets 22% in 2029, I'll be very surprised. We're not fighting the ANC. We're fighting the chaos of a lack of leadership.
That's true, yeah.
That's all we're fighting.
Cyril's not the president. No.
People care too much, and I think the DA care far too much about the ANC. Fuck the ANC. Who gives a shit? Like focus on what people voted for.
Exactly. No, I agree with that 100%. That's again the downfall of the DA. You have John Steenhuisen at an agricultural seminar saying EWC is great and we're gonna find ways to work together, blah blah. And then literally hours later goes on and wears a DA garment and DA branded stuff and says, DA is vehemently against the EWC. You can't have a leader flip-flopping like that. And I
mean, if only they had good people who could advise them.
I hear that they recently fired their one chance of having a decent employee at that place.
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah, shame. I need to speak to him. Maybe I'll
have him on the show.
I'll have him on the show. Can point the camera to the mirror. But Mark, just in conclusion, I think as someone in the law and someone who understands the legal system, it looks like the solutions are going to be not within the legal system, so to speak. Like I know you very well, and you're going to say no, but there's many remedies and fast tracking courts and land claims courts and just enforce the PI Act. But we live in South Africa. Let's be real. Like the solutions are going to be broadly very decentralized and very private.
Yeah, look, there's a sense in which once your judicial infrastructure fails, it then incentivizes people to take the law into their own hands. And if the judicial infrastructure has failed, then you can't hold those people accountable either. So again, you devolve into an anarchic chaos. People said, what's the point in going through an ordinary eviction proceeding when it's going to take me 5 years and render me bankrupt? I'll just hire some thugs and maybe those guys will go to court, but then it'll be difficult for them to sort of get a court date or find the resources.
All you do is sublease your house, right? If someone's not paying, okay, here's a trick. Here's a trick, right? So you have a tenant who's not paying. You just rent your house to someone else. You're not paying. You breach the contract. I can't evict you, but I can lease my house to this guy who's like 6'4" and all his friends, and they're coming for a braai every single day and eating all your food. Do you think your non-paying tenants will stay? No, they won't. You're allowed to do that.
So I always think about this little kid story I read when I was young about the king who's got a mice problem in his palace. And he thinks, well, there's a very simple solution to this. I'm going to get some cats in. And it works. All the mice disappear. But now he's got cats everywhere. So he gets in dogs, chases out the cats. Then he brings in horses, brings in elephants. And he's like, how am I getting rid of these elephants? They're smashing all the walls. He goes, I know, I'll get some mice. So I do worry about those solutions where you get in the thugs to chase out your tenants, and then they might say, well, we don't want to leave anymore. This is quite a nice place. But you're right. I mean, people will find these innovative solutions to solve problems. And I think what's frustrating is that you do have an infrastructure that could work in principle and is failing and is causing all these difficulties. I mean, our judiciary are very underfunded, but they do play an important role in the economic system. So if people know they can get disputes resolved quickly, then they're much more likely to take risks. And that's important for innovation and for growth. So as I say, having a sort of idea of there are different overlapping systems that interact with each other, and that if you allow the one to die, that disease will spread and others will die.
We need free market solution systems, like this organized thing that you mentioned earlier, right? Like how do you build a crystal? Let people figure out how to build it, like without any plan.
Yeah. So you might, for example, allowing a range of private courts to emerge, like we have with arbitrations, is one solution. I mean, I was thinking about your Carl Schmitt idea, and I think it was tried, and it didn't end very well.
Nayib Bukele is great. What's wrong with him? Are you talking about Hitler?
Yeah. I mean, this is very much the sort of legal theorist for the Third Reich, and I suppose the difficulty.
No. He denounced that immensely.
There were no Nazis after the Second World War.
Really?
Yeah. They all denounced very quickly.
I've seen many flags recently. No, Carl Schmitt was not a Nazi guy. He just didn't like liberal democracy like me. But that doesn't mean the solution is Nazism. Let's be honest.
No. I suppose the idea is I understand when people see chaos, they think if we can just have someone impose some order, and also they're frustrated by a whole range of different judges, the sort of paralysis and the slowness, or and saying if you can just have one wise person make the decision. The worry is when you centralize power in the hands of the few. I mean, think about which politician would you be comfortable with being the sovereign? Which individual?
General Mkonazi.
I think sometimes these guys, as you say, they start off well, and they might very be reasonable for a while and do the right thing. But I do think power is a corrupting influence. And also, I suppose the question is how much tolerance we have for the innocents who get thrown into mass graves along the way. We might say, well, if you look at what Bukele has done, you've had one of the worst murder rates in the world plunged down to one of the lowest murder rates in the world. A lot of people look at it and they go, that's like an incredible achievement. And I suppose you can ask, can that be duplicated? And are there costs that we're willing to bear to have a system like that?
Yes, I can bear those costs. Because I won't bear them.
Well, that's it, right? So we always think, well, I'm unlikely to be the person who will be unjustly incarcerated. I'm one of the good guys,
But I'm a person who might be a victim of a land grab.
Sure.
Right? Irrespective of my privileged position, or you guys might be as well, So at the end of the day, you need order. Either way, decentralized, chaotic order, or centralized, very strategic order. But we need order in South Africa. It's fundamentally, I think, the theme of your documentary. And how that's going to materialize is difficult to understand, and that's why we're having this conversation, because we actually don't know.
Yeah, and also the problem with kind of, people kind of doing it themselves is that if you do remove that tent or that even just a tarp that goes over the head, you are liable. That person can sue you. You have to then give them monetary compensation and rebuild.
Only if they win, and only if they get there in time, and knowing the fact that the first court date is in 2032, let them. Go ahead. Sue me, bitches. Like you must use the system against that as well. That's the thing. The chaos can work both ways.
Funny if there's an asymmetry on that. So what you have is that to get your eviction done, you have to go through ordinary time periods. But if you were unlawfully evicted, you can go through urgent time periods.
What?
So you can get to court within a couple of days.
Okay, this is a scam.
So that's why it makes it sort of difficult.
Okay, ignore my remedy. It's not going to work at all.
Yeah, so I think you know, I think you have to be on. Unfortunately, if someone's going to land grab you, you have to be there immediately, and you have to follow that process immediately. But I think through projects like this documentary that shines a light on the failures of the PI Act and how it's been manipulated in very nefarious ways. It's why I don't want to stop continuing to talk about it. In the following documentaries, like I said, I have areas that I want to look into, and I believe there's other legislation that is also harmful, like ESTA, which I want to look into. And like I said, every land grab has a different story. So I would even like to come to Johannesburg and do a land grab story here, because I believe
you just have to walk in the CBD. Like, you don't
need security for that. But yeah, I think there's other keeping those stories in the forefront of South African political discourse and conversation is very important.
It is.
And the more you show people what the truth is, how this is orchestrated, how this has come to be, how it's manipulated, and who benefits from it, and how when you buy that first house or you buy that first piece of land to start your business, that in a moment, if you saved your whole life to buy that piece of land, and in one single moment someone can come and take it, and you are stuck, there's nothing you can do. That angers people, that upsets people, and it should. And people should be talking more about it and sharing this documentary far and wide, and letting people see what exactly is going on in South Africa, and it's a complete erosion of property rights.
Correct. And often it's the people that can't defend themselves that are the most harmed by it.
Yes.
So I'll do the shilling for you. So guys, if you go to the description, there is I believe it's a donation link to fund future projects that Joe is working on, and you will be deemed a producer on those projects, and your name will come up as a producing credit, if I remember correctly.
Yes, and you get early access to the documentary.
And you get early access as well. These are all great ideas. I wonder where you got them from. But anyway, I highly recommend that you do so. So Mark, Joe, I can't thank you enough for coming all the way. Well, Joe especially from Cape Town. Thank you. I appreciate it. Mark, thank you for your expertise on the matter.
Just thank you for having me. It's been a really awesome conversation.
The pleasure. Pleasure is all mine. Thank you for watching Undercurrents. Please subscribe. See you in the next one. Cheers.